Alrighty, what is up, everybody? So, if you've tuned in with us over the last several months, you know that usually on Wednesdays we go live for what we call our deep dive podcasts. It's just an opportunity for us to go a little deeper on some of the topics we've been covering during our Sunday services. Well, this is not a Wednesday. This is a Friday morning. And we are kind of in the process of reworking a lot of what we're doing with the deep dive. We're reworking the set a little bit. This is a in-progress new set, so excuse some of the messiness of it. We're still figuring out what we're doing here with the new set. But we're also kind of reworking some of the topics and things that we are addressing. Here at Wayfarers, we have been doing a series we're just calling Backstories, where we have been filming different people's kind of quick versions of their backstory, of their faith journey. And today, originally, we were going to do a more of a deep dive on the backstory of Greg Waddell, who's somebody you'll see his backstory coming up on our social media here soon. Greg had to cancel for a few different reasons, so we pivoted. And we're going to get to know a little bit of Jacob's backstory today. In the Hebrew transliterated version of Jacob's name, it's Yaakov. So if you're confused as to the title of this live stream, that is what's going on here. But we figured that this would kind of just be an opportunity for us to hear a little bit more about Jacob. If you've been tuning in with us, you've probably seen maybe the four of us before, but you don't really know some of our stories. So we thought we would take the next few weeks to just do that a little bit, get a little bit of a deep dive on people's backstories. So we're doing that today. How's everybody else doing today? You guys doing good? Jacob, you ready to bear all the details of your life story?
Too late if I'm not.
You're here. And I've got Noah Randolph here next to me, our teaching pastor here at Wayfarers.
Hey, how's it going? I'm looking at the computer, so if it looks like my eyes are going down, that's why.
Noah's not praying. He's not just like really pious and praying the entire time. He is looking at the computer, making sure everything looks good, doing the camera switching and all for us. We got Noah here. I guess I didn't introduce myself. If you don't know who I am, my name's Nick Griffin. I'm the lead pastor here. And we've got the fan favorite, everybody's favorite, Ashley Wakefield with us today, too.
I'm just ready for Jacob to start spilling all his secrets.
Yeah.
Divulge.
Jacob, this is actually an intervention.
Oh, no. The door's not open, so.
It's like, we lock the door so you can't leave because you're going to be changed before you get out of here.
No. So, I figured it would be good as we do these podcasts just to start with some prayer. We've been talking about in the church. We want to do that a little bit more. So, Noah, why don't you start us with some prayer here live on the stream, and then we'll jump into Jacob's story right after that.
So now I can have my eyes looking down.
Yes, you can look like you're praying. So.
Dear God, thank you so much for just bringing us all here today. Thank you for Jacob's story, God. Thank you for what you've done in his life. This is going to be great to get to hear what you've put on his heart to tell, and get to hear the work that you've done in his life. And I just pray that as we listen and ask questions, that your work and your evidence will be shown through his story, and that really it's about what you do, not what we do. And I pray that we always keep that in our minds. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so let's dive right in. Jacob, you gave us kind of a short version of your story recently that we posted on our socials. One of the first things you mentioned was that you grew up in the church. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing. You had a few stops along the way, but where'd you grow up?
Yeah. So oftentimes when people ask me where I'm from, what my family does, I always tell them that's a lot longer of an answer than you wanted. I'm from several different places in Mississippi, but originally I grew up on Sunbelt Christian Youth Ranch, which is a Christian home for troubled teenagers who, for whatever reason, they needed to be separated from their environment and taken somewhere where they can not go to jail.
Yeah, right. Because usually it's a lot of kids who maybe have gotten in trouble with the law and their options were like, you can go to jail or you can go to this ranch.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's sort of the environment that I grew up in. I grew up in where my dad was taking in these kids, and he was trying to help redefine the family unit in these kids' lives and give them a work ethic and teach them the Christian life. And so I grew up in that home, seeing kids come in ready to just fight my dad physically. And then still to this day, many of them call my dad on Father's Day instead of their own. And several of them do it with my mom as well. They call her on Mother's Day. And so these people that came in with crazy lives, crazy stories, I saw God move in their life at a very young age, and he changed them. And so I saw God move early.
Yeah. How old were you during that time?
We moved there. I don't remember my exact age because it was somewhere around 4 weeks.
Oh, yeah. Really early.
So I don't exactly remember that time period. My parents were house parents until I was 6. And then me and my mom stayed there until I was 10. So I was there for the first 10 years of my life. I was there. My dad always joked I was the worst kid the ranch ever had. I was there longer than anyone else. So seeing God move in those years, those were the formative years, right? Those are the years that kids are sponges. They take in the most. And we never really had a whole lot. That was really a kind of a lifestyle that was, we got what we got off of a lot of donations and hard work. We did our own gardens, our own animals. So that was my formative years.
Yeah.
And then years later, I started moving around a little bit. In middle school, I was homeschooled by my dad as he was a truck driver. So I was homeschooled through a Christian homeschooling program. For several different reasons, we thought that was the best. One big reason that is a part of my story and what God has done in my life is I had a reading issue growing up. They really couldn't figure out why I wasn't passing some of my classes. Because they would talk to me, and if I was brave enough to talk back when I was shy and didn't talk, they would realize I knew the material. If they read the test to me, I knew it. But if I had to read it myself, I would fail. And so doing homeschooling, the computer read to me. Other people were able to read the stuff to me, so I was able to do that. So my favorite class was Bible because I already knew that subject.
So your parents had worked in this, because it was like a Christian ministry, this Sunbelt camp.
Sunbelt Christian Youth Ranch.
And then after that, you started being homeschooled with your dad as he was a truck driver at the time. And that's when you started to realize some of these difficulties you had with reading. And so I guess it's that Christian kid thing where, like, you grew up, you liked Bible because you already knew those stories. You knew that
exactly.
the subject, so the reading wasn't as hard. That's funny because I think most people would think Bible is like one of the hardest subjects. But I guess that's that growing up as a Christian kid thing there. So what was your like sort of difficulty with, you had that difficulty with reading. They had kind of discovered, what it was. What kind of came after that? How did you, what were the next few years after that looking like?
So with that, I did homeschooling from 6th to 8th grade. through a lot of that, even though it was good on.
We got a guest.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tim.
It is Tim.
Hey Tim. Sorry, I forgot to text you. We're running a little late on our podcast, so I'll message you in a second when we're done.
Just love the randomness.
Oh yeah. Hey, that's how you know this is live. We're doing it live.
I had a question about your homeschooling. So I've only met one other person in my life that was homeschooled, and this is like no insult to her whatsoever. I think it was just a part of her upbringing, but I think a part of her homeschooling kind of made her a little naive about certain things, like with dealing like relationships with other people. Like she had a really hard time being able to distinguish who was her friend and who wasn't. And it seemed extremely obvious to everybody else that certain people didn't like her. And when you would try to explain that to her, she just...
There was just like social cues she was missing out on.
Yeah, she had social cues that she was missing out on, like certain facial expressions, the way people said certain things. And so did you ever have that issue, or were you just...
Yeah, because now I've noticed the same thing. It's funny, we've talked about this, but my wife was homeschooled, and I remember talking to her. This was one of the first conversations I had with her too, because I was just like, every other homeschooler I know is so like socially awkward. Like they don't understand some of those social cues and stuff like that. Kind of like what you're saying.
Yeah.
But Jacob's not that way. We love Jacob. He picks up on social cues.
Yeah.
So yeah, what was that social? Did you feel like you missed out a little bit on those years when you weren't maybe in the social environment?
I don't think so. Mostly because I went to public school, kindergarten through 5th grade. And I grew up in a house with 12 other teenagers. I wouldn't say other teenagers. I was a small child. I wasn't a teenager. But
Yeah.
12 teenagers.
12 teenagers, yeah.
That typically rotated every couple months to every couple years. So new people in and out of the life all the time.
Yeah.
I will say, oftentimes it just depends on how much parents of homeschooled kids make it a priority to socialize their kids.
Yeah.
If you're going to homeschool them, get them into some sort of a league or group, or make sure they're super involved in something else community-wise, so that way they can interact with other kids.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
And I know a lot of people that took that approach. They homeschooled their kids so they could monitor what they were learning, but then also gave them plenty of social opportunities.
Yeah. So you could still kind of develop that.
Yeah.
So did you like that homeschooling period of your life, that time when you were homeschooling, or since you had been in public school before? Or?
Yeah, I liked it to some degree. I was really shy as a kid.
Yeah.
As someone who couldn't read and sometimes would be laughed at during popcorn reading periods.
I hate that.
So to some degree, I was like, I'm glad I'm not always being looked at, as I'm not always around people. It's funny, I was very introverted then. I'm not quite that way anymore. So I kind of enjoyed just being able to sit at home, mostly do what I want, and occasionally take classes.
Yeah.
Did your parents ever do to you what they did to me? Because I know I didn't have a reading, issue, but I was really shy and I didn't like to talk to people. So my parents would have this thing where they would make me talk to other people. Like if we went to like a restaurant or something, they would make me go
Make you like order, or make
you order your own food, or make you talk to somebody and ask them a question. And I hated that. Did your parents ever make you do that?
Not really. Or if they did it in such a way that I didn't really notice. They were forcing me into the situation. Of course, I was also a stubborn kid, so if I didn't want to talk to you, I just didn't talk.
Yeah.
And I took the yelling or whatever from my parents about how rude it is to not talk to people.
All right. We had this, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There was this girl in our family. She's an adult now, but she was kind of the same way. Like she would not speak to you at all over anything. Like, and I remember my mom told me this story, and this was back when we lived in Oklahoma, because I was born in Oklahoma and I lived there till I was 4. And I
Yeah,
think that
we gotta do the backstory on Ashley at some point here soon too. But yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And they had brought her back with them one day, and they had told me this story where she had like peed on herself in the back seat of the car and never said a word.
Oh my
Because
gosh.
she just did not like to talk to anybody, and they didn't find out till they got back to Oklahoma, and they were just like, "Why didn't you say anything?"
That's like next level not talking.
Well, I used to always joke. I was like, I was probably the only kid who had to have a parent-teacher conference because I didn't talk in class.
It's not like this kid's talking too much in class.
Yeah.
It's like he's not talking.
It's like we directly ask him a question and he will not answer us. And so that was just me being a shy, introverted kid. Not because I wasn't socialized, because I had several people in my life, several teenagers that were always around, that I was always hanging out with at home. I got out of that a little bit when I did theater in high school, because that was my next stage. The homeschooling program was not going to give me a degree. I was going to have to take a GED test, and my parents didn't want me to have to worry
Go through
about
all
that.
Yeah.
So I sort of skipped over this a little bit, not meaning to. I just didn't think about it. When I was 6, my parents divorced. My dad remarried when I was in the 8th grade. When he did, I moved back in with him to do public school with my step-siblings.
So he wasn't truck driver anymore at this point.
He was. I just wasn't living. I just wasn't on the road with him.
You were able to live. Okay.
I lived with I had to move back in with my mom.
Yep.
Because he switched companies. They wouldn't let me ride with him anymore. But when he remarried, I was able to go stay with my step family.
Right.
So I lived there and went to public school with them. And this is where the reading comes back into it.
Yeah.
Because they like, we're going to have to make you do a placement test to see if you are essentially smart enough to go into the 9th grade. Are you smart enough to go into high school?
You're like old enough to 9th grade, but are you
like,
ready
that's the
for it?
age I'm supposed to go to, but can you test into that grade? So they gave me a placement test, and it turns out I could not test into that grade. I tested in on a 4th grade reading level. See if I can remember all of it. It's like 7th grade math level, 6th grade science level. So like, we can't put this kid in high school. He would not make it. But they insisted, my parents insisted that, like, no, he's smarter than that. And so they gave me an IQ test, which was read to me instead of just given to me
to
on
read.
paper.
Yeah. Like someone read it out loud to you.
Someone sat with me, read it, and I told them what I thought the answer was.
Yeah.
Did phenomenal on that part. They were like, okay, now this really doesn't make any sense because he can't read, but he knows a lot.
Yeah.
So they put me in high school in the special ed program. So special education classes, my tests were read to me. I got extra time on tests, extra time on homeworks. And I'm very grateful for some of those teachers who saw how smart I was and refused to let me live on a crutch.
Yeah.
I could not use that as a crutch.
Yeah.
So they really pushed me to not use it as an excuse, to not let my grade slip just because I couldn't read. And so because of that, and by the grace of God giving me understanding through lectures and other means, I was able to graduate 3rd in my class.
Yeah. That's what's up, man.
Which is pretty good for a kid who can't
for somebody
read.
who was reading at like a 4th grade level when he came into high school. Yeah, I remember you telling me a little bit of that story whenever we first met years ago, whenever you first started studying at Mid-South. And I remember just being really impressed by how much resilience that showed, because, you know, you came in kind of behind the curve on a lot of people, and you obviously, I mean, I think you told me, like, in your head, you were like, I'm not gonna fall behind. Like, you had, like, resolved that you were going to get your reading levels up, get your grade up, work hard, you know, do all that.
I didn't want statistically, the test showed I would flunk out.
Yeah.
That I would drop out and not finish my high school degree. And
you were like, I'm going to prove them wrong.
yeah, I was like, I don't want to be that.
Yeah.
I can do better than that. And so that was my main resolve. And I had teachers that when days that I felt like I couldn't do that, they kept me going.
Yeah.
I had a question. Hopefully this isn't too personal, but you don't have to answer. But I know you mentioned the idea that your parents got divorced and that they got remarried. So was there any tension in the midst of that? Only because I know that I've had certain people in my family who, you don't stay with the person you have kids with, and then you have to learn how to co-parent, and then people date other people, marry other people, and that can create tension. And
I will say one of the things that was a big blessing in my life, my parents resolved and came to the conclusion when they had my brother, who's older than me. They were like, if we get divorced, this kid is not living in a single parent household. And not to say this, so it's like, even if we divorce and we're both single, the kid does not have one parent. We are both their parents. We will both do what it takes. So I tell people often, one of the things, so many times you see divorced parents that can't even be present when the kid is swapped.
Yeah.
Right? A grandparent has to be involved, or somebody else has to be involved in swapping the kid between households. How my parents oftentimes would swap me from one to the other is there was a place about halfway between where they both lived, and there was a restaurant. And so what we did is, like, if I was with my mom, we would go, me and my mom would sit down and order. My dad would come in, sit down with us, order his food. We would eat. When my mom got done, she would get up and leave. And then me and my dad would stay until he finished, and then we would leave. So my parents were still, they did their best to really...
To kind of still be on good terms with each other.
To parent together. And so that was something that I know is like the exception. That's not the norm. And so I don't carry as much like trauma or negative feelings about that in my life because of that. My parents really did try to help each other. They didn't bicker. They didn't take each other to court all the time. They joked because they hired one lawyer, and the lawyer said, "What do you need me for? You don't need me here."
Yeah. It's like, you guys have got it worked out peacefully. And did you get along with your step siblings?
That mostly. I have had some rocky times with them, mostly just because of growing up in different home situations. Whereas I grew up directly Christian, they did not. They grew up with Christian influences, but not as direct. And so there were some times where the discipline in my life that had been laid out by my dad was not in theirs, and so that kind of rubbed against each other, caused some friction. But for the most part, they all still connect with my dad. After they all moved out of the house, they started liking my dad a lot more once they became adults. Realized that man actually probably knew more than we gave him credit for.
Because I think when you don't come together as parents and actually figure out what's going on with your kids, it makes things more difficult. Yeah. My mother has a friend who, I think after he got divorced, I think because I know he has 2 kids. One was a marriage, one was just dating. And I think from the one he was divorced from, I think I was told what happened was that her mother started to date someone else who had a son. And the son was actually hitting her when they weren't around. And so he didn't know about it because there was tension between him. And so she didn't want to bring her over to the house to see him. So he wasn't allowed to see her for a period of time because of things that were going on between them. And so he didn't know that her boyfriend's son was hitting her until he saw her again. And she was just like, I don't feel safe around them. So, yeah.
So, because it is interesting. I've talked to other friends who have come from families that got divorced, and it definitely does seem like that. I just haven't heard over the years we've talked. I haven't heard you bring that up much. It doesn't seem to have affected. Doesn't seem to have been a central moment in your life.
Yeah.
As I know it is for a lot of other people. So I guess it sounds like you're pretty thankful that some of those more terrible situations like that and other situations like that aren't really what happened. It's central enough that you forgot to mention it as you were telling your story, as you were going through there. So it's obviously a major part, it seems like, but it doesn't seem like it's a part that really like drastically changed anything for you.
Yeah.
So if we're getting back to you graduate, third in your class, you've worked through those difficulties. What was your kind of college outlook looking like after that?
Yeah.
Did you want to do college?
Yeah. So I wasn't always exactly sure what I wanted to do. I had kind of settled on teaching, but I didn't know exactly in what type of role. Little kids, high schoolers, middle schoolers, college level. I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to aim for.
And that was because of how much these other teachers impacted you, right? Like they were huge in pushing you to continue to do better. So you're like, I want to give back and do the same thing.
Yeah, my teachers convinced me to take Teacher Academy in high school. It was a vocational class that they taught. So I was like the only guy in this class of 10 other girls that are there. And down the hall is the mechanics class with like the one girl and like 10 other guys.
Yeah. Good old Corinth, Mississippi.
But they convinced me to do that, and I really liked teaching once I got into that. And so I wasn't sure where I was going to go, and I just filled out a couple of applications that kind of came to me through email that schools had sent me.
Schools would be like, hey, you should apply to our school.
Yeah, they were like just checking out different like GPAs in high schools, and mine was pretty good. So they were like, hey, you should come here.
Right.
And I got, so one of those applications was for Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah.
And so I applied, got this very large scholarship.
Because Millsaps is expensive school.
It's a top-of-the-line school in Mississippi.
It's like top of Mississippi, I think, a lot of times as far as academics, prestige, the cost, different things like that. I've heard,
definitely, yeah.
Many of us have probably heard of Millsaps. So.
It's one of those colleges that they gave me it's like $115,000 scholarship.
Yeah.
For the 4 years I was there, and everybody was like, "You're going to college for free plus some," and I was like, "No, that's half. That will literally cover half.
that literally covers half of the cost of the school." But still, that was huge to get that.
It was a huge deal for me, for the school. I told my counselor at the school, I was like, "Hey, I got this acceptance letter from this college, first acceptance letter I'd received," and she was just like, "Okay, you can't go anywhere else. You got to go there."
Yeah.
That's such a big, I think it was almost a big deal for the school to have someone go there as much as it would be for me. And so I was like, well, that would be a good opportunity, all the great stuff. It's not too large. It was about 800 students. And so I took a couple trips down to Jackson to see. I liked the campus. It wasn't too big. Obviously, I like small colleges.
Yeah.
And so I went, and that's where my faith started rubbing into issues and conflicts. It was a school that had people from so many different religions and backgrounds and countries, that growing up in small town Mississippi, you only hear as almost demonized.
Yeah.
They're only really talked about theoretically. These people exist, but
But you've never met
meeting
any
them
of them
in this town
Yeah.
is not going to happen.
Right.
And so I was starting to meet people, Muslims, Hindus, Wiccans, people that were on the complete opposite political spectrum from my town.
Right. I remember you said your roommate was like from an African country.
Yeah,
He was
my
like
roommate,
very wealthy.
Yeah, my roommate was from Kenya, and his dad worked in the embassy.
Yeah.
And so
it's like the idea of meeting a guy who works at the Kenyan embassy in
Like, we're gonna
small
be
town
friends for a
Mississippi.
long time. I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
it's like my first roommate here is pretty,
Not the kind of person you're ever going to meet in Corinth.
Yeah, no,
Let's
I
say,
was like, I'll never meet somebody who's like this ever again.
Yeah, and I remember too. You said like you had a lot of LGBT friends that you met in that environment, and so it sounds like it was just kind of a culture shock compared to the small town Mississippi that you had grown up in.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a culture shock for all of the friend groups that I had were not Christian. It was the first time in my life where Christianity was a minority, which was strange in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And so I had to adjust a little bit to hearing other people's thoughts on Christianity that weren't favorable.
Yeah.
They had negative opinions about the faith and what we believe, and I had to adjust to that.
Do you feel like before that point, since no one had really like challenged you on it, you just had never really had to think about, like, it was just kind of assumed you were Christian? Had you ever had a moment before that where you were like questioning Christianity or anything like that, or was this kind of your first big moment where you had those?
There was a small period of time in high school where the Mormon Church had looked interesting to me. Which to some degree, if that's like the worst thing you can do, then that's not as bad as you could really think of. But I wrestled with that and what I fully believed, and I sort of made my faith my own. It was not just my parents. It was not just the town I grew up in. But I knew I was a Christian because I knew what I believed after that.
So that was while you were still in high school.
Yeah. And so moving to college, I had kind of already done a soul searching of, do I believe this? Yes. And so I had a little more of a foundation than most small town high school students do when they go to college.
Right. And then you showed up to college and you started meeting all these people who it's not even that they just like weren't Christians. It's that they were like actively against Christianity. They're like, no, Christians are the worst. I don't want anything to do with Christians.
Yeah.
Did they know you were a Christian?
Several people did.
Yeah.
I didn't completely hide my faith.
Right.
Definitely times I wanted to. And the longer I was there, for a majority of the time, I would say I didn't quite stick to being a faithful Christian for the whole time. But I had groups. I had got connected with some of the churches in the area and different groups that was able to keep me reined in a little bit from realizing, okay, this is what I believe. I need to stay faithful to this. But the majority of my friends were people, my core friend group was a lesbian, a Wiccan, an atheist, a gay man, a Catholic. And so like the Catholic was the closest thing to my religion,
sort of evangelical
faith,
Christianity you had grown up in.
And so that was like the core group that I really hung out with all the time.
And in hindsight now, when you're thinking back on that time in your life, did you feel like that was good? You think like that was a good exposure for you, or was it a challenge? Is it something,
It
mixed
definitely
bag?
was a challenge. But as I look back, I grew more both as a person and as a Christian long term there than I ever would have in a Christian bubble. For one, I now know how to talk to someone struggling with those issues, to
Right.
someone in that lifestyle,
Right.
to people in those religions.
Right.
Whereas before, if I'd never met someone there, then I don't know how to really talk with them. I don't know what their struggles are. I don't know what's going through their minds. But because of that experience, I feel like I have more of a heart towards those people
Yeah.
and more understanding of their lifestyle than just plain blind judgment.
Right. And so, obviously, you're here at Mid-South Christian College now.
Mhm.
You didn't end up finishing at Millsaps.
No, I did not.
What kind of inspired you to make that transition and
Yeah.
transfer schools? And I seem to remember when we talked about this story in years past, there was a particular professor you had at
Yeah.
Millsaps that was a big issue that kind of helped inspire some of that move as well.
Yeah. Well, there was two main influential professors, neither of which were Christian.
Yeah.
One, however, was more anti-Christian. He was less an atheist and more just anti-Christian.
Christian specifically, yeah.
So does that mean towards people, like if he was anti-Christian, he just, like he didn't want anything to do with the person, like he was against the person and not just their belief?
I did not know him on a personal level. I took the time to not know him on a personal level.
That would
I was
be
in
best.
the only time I had a class with him was my largest class with over 100 students.
Yeah.
So I was kind of able to hide a little bit. There was a lecture that I tell by him. It was called "The Absurdity of Existence." It was a skepticism lecture about the extreme skepticism that arose in human history, and the big example is always that wall. You cannot convince me that wall is made of Jell-O and only solid when you touch it. You can't convince me otherwise. Because skepticism, you can't prove me wrong.
Right.
You can't
It could
prove
be.
me. Yeah.
You're like, well, but I touch it and it's solid. And it's like, yeah, because
that's what happens.
turns solid when you touch it. It's made of Jell-O otherwise, and you can't prove one way or another.
And later on in that lecture, he says basically, it's crazy for people, adults, to believe in things like the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and heaven and hell. It's just absurd to think and believe in that type of stuff.
Right.
And
So it was just kind of lumped in all together.
Yeah, he lumped these little fairy tales that we tell kids to believe. Heaven, if you dwell on heaven and hell, then you're just as crazy as some adult who believes the Tooth Fairy is 100% real.
And see, I don't even like that because it's not even the fact that that's what he personally believes that bothers me. It's the fact that you're expressing it in a classroom, because I feel like that there are certain environments where you have to be neutral and you become too biased, and then it creates too much division between students you favor over ones that you don't, over certain things you want to teach over things that you don't because of your own personal bias. And it's just like, I used to be a substitute teacher, and it wasn't like there were like a lot of moments where I got to talk about Christ or God, but it's at the end of the day, I have to understand that in that classroom, there's a certain thing that needs to be done, and I can't let my personal feelings about how somebody else is raised or not get in the way of that. And I feel like that's just like a level of immaturity when you're letting your personal feelings and biases get in the way of what you're supposed to be accomplishing in that moment.
Right. And so it was just this very antagonistic perspective towards Christianity.
And I will say,
not being biased, unbiased like that.
The college itself had a neutral policy. It was, you cannot do that. The problem was a lot of the professors that were doing it were tenure.
Because they can't get fired.
So they can't get fired because of
Right.
it. But the college as a whole had a policy. They were really concerned about making sure no one felt attacked like that.
Right.
I know they sent out memos. I know they like addressed it in certain ways. Just some professors didn't listen.
So that was one of the professors, and that
Yeah.
you remember this particular lecture as being one that you were like, wow, this guy's
The only time I
Really?
wanted to get up and
Yeah.
leave, and I sat on the front row
yeah.
in front of 100+ students. I
Right.
wanted to get up, walk up the stairs, and just leave.
Right.
I was probably too shy. That's probably why I didn't do it.
And so you said there were two professors, though.
Yeah.
And there was another one.
So there was another professor that I'm very grateful for, and I still talk to. He was a religious studies professor that he was not Christian, but the way he would describe it is he doesn't care what your belief is as long as the answer of why you believe that is more than I grew up in it. If you can give me a good reason for believing that, then all power to you.
Because I think that statement that he said has power in itself, because I really agree with that. Because I think even the Word of God, I don't know if it's in Peter, 1st or 2nd Peter, where it talks about giving an answer. Which
Yeah.
it could be the wrong
Yeah.
book, but it talks about giving an answer for the hope that is within you. So it's like even if nobody else understands why you believe what you believe, you have to stand firm in why I believe.
Yeah, you got to have a reason for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You got an answer for people when they ask, why do you believe that?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you.
And so
So that was this professor's perspective.
And so he was actually an Old Testament scholar. And I took several classes. He was my advisor. It's very interesting, as I'll get into later, about when I was starting the leaving process. He was one of the ones that was like, don't go. But going through the year, I was there for 1 year. I did 1 year there. And so in the spring semester, second semester, spring break is coming up, and one of the small groups I'm in is going on a mission trip to Indianapolis. Wasn't super expensive. I think it was like $400 to go. And I'd kind of like committed to going. I was like, sure, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to go. But as it got kind of closer, and I was like, I really don't have the money to go, and I don't my motivation was like, I don't want to go.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll use money as an excuse and won't try to find the money. Though the leader of the mission trip took it upon himself to talk to the church finance office and called me back and was like, hey, so the church is willing to let you come. You don't have to pay up front. You can payment plan when we get back. And I was like,
well, there's my one excuse.
There was my excuse. My only reason to not go is now out the window. And so I went, and I loved it. It was a great time. One, it was a city I'd not been to. It was a week with other Christians that would challenge me to grow and think. The thing that really has always stuck with me is that's when I felt my call into ministry. All throughout my life, as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I could never land on anything solid for more than a year or two, every idea I ever had, my dad always backed it up with, and preach. He just always, no matter what it was, I could be teacher, fireman, police officer, army guy, businessman. It was always,
yeah, you
and
can
preach.
do that, and you're going to be a preacher.
Yeah. And I was so, any other time in my life where I felt called into ministry, I was never sure if it was God or my dad.
Because your dad said that your whole life.
He said it all the time. I was like, am I just feeling like I should do ministry work because my dad always says it, or because I actually should? So while I was there, it was Thursday while we were there. It's Thursday of that week. And that morning, we separated in the hotel to just go to a quiet corner and pray for the morning. Before we went out and did anything. It was going to be kind of like our semi-day off. Let's go see the city day of the mission trip. So they were like, so if that's what we're going to do today, we need to spend like quite a bit of time doing something spiritual. So we prayed for a while. And I remember giving the prayer, Lord, if you want me to do something in ministry, if you want me to go into ministry, give me a clear sign that I cannot ignore. And so later that day, we're walking around downtown. We come to one of the statues that's real famous in Indianapolis. And we're sitting around, and the leaders decided they wanted to do an affirmation circle. And if you don't know what an affirmation circle is, we all got in a circle looking at each other, and there was just a couple of rules. Whoever started would pick somebody in the group and say one thing that they appreciate or see God moving in that person's life. And the other rule is, if you're someone that's being spoken to, you have to accept it. Your response has to be, thank you, I accept that. You can't be, well, no, I'm not really that good at it. You have to accept the compliment. And so we're going around the circle, and it comes to the leader, the guy who spoke to the finance office for me and everything, the one who got me there. And he looks at me and he goes, Jacob, I don't know what God has planned for you, but I know he's going to use you greatly in the ministry. And I was like, can I get an ice pack for the slap that just like...
It's like, well, I gave you something you couldn't deny.
I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting within 12 hours. And so that day kind of continued more as a blur.
Yeah.
After that.
It kind of reminds me of something we did at our church where our pastor had a visitor come in, and I can't remember what his name was, but he had something similar. He didn't call it an affirmation circle, but basically it was like practicing operating in the prophetic. Because, not everybody walks in the office of a prophet. We all have the ability to prophesy because we have the spirit. So the idea was that certain people had to volunteer to come up, and then we had to basically listen to the Holy Spirit to see what it was saying to us about whatever individual we were speaking to. And there was one woman who, got a word from someone, and she was completely turned off by it. She was like, that's not true. That's not happening. That's not true. And then the guy who came, he was basically like, well, you don't ever want to reject like a prophecy because it may not make sense to you now, but it may make sense to you later. Yeah. So
you got that answer like 12 hours later, like you said.
I made the prayer. I opened myself up to it. And God gave me that clear, direct answer the same day. And so the rest of the mission trip kind of just came and went after that. We returned back to Jackson, and while just a couple weeks go by, and I'm still really kind of wrestling with it. Like, what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean? Do I finish here and go to seminary? Do I quit here and go to a Bible college? What do I do with this now? And I remember I was sitting in the library. I was writing a paper for one of my classes. It's like one of the major papers. Like this paper was like going to be a part of my final or something. And instead, it was late at night, and instead of doing the paper, I don't fully remember looking up the Mid-South website. But while I was there, instead of writing my paper, I was filling out the application for Mid-South Christian College.
Which your dad had studied at Mid-South, so that was
Yes.
kind of one of your connections with the school. Because, again, you like small schools. You went from an 800-people school to, like, a 20-people school.
Oh, yeah. And so I filled out the application. I didn't even tell my dad that I was deciding to do this. I needed a reference for the application. And I needed somebody's number, and I didn't have it. So I called my dad, and I was like, hey, I need so-and-so's number. And he's like, why? I was like, oh, I'm filling out this application for Mid-South, and I need them as a reference. And that's how I ended up telling him I was moving colleges. And so through that whole process, I don't remember who. I think I told like one person. I mentioned in passing that I was leaving that college.
At Millsaps. You mentioned to like one person.
I was like leaving in passing and like I don't remember doing it directly. But in one of my other classes, like a few days later, one of my professors asked me, he was like, Jacob, can you stay after class? I need to talk to you. And I'm like, I didn't do it. Like I didn't do it. I have done all my assignments myself. I did not cheat. And they're like, I heard this nasty rumor about you. And I was like, that sounds horrible. What? I was like, I heard you're leaving. I heard you're moving colleges. And I was like, oh, that's not as bad as I thought this was going to go. And I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about it and stuff. And it spread like wildfire after that. There were people that I didn't tell. All of a sudden, my advisor wanted to have a sit-down dinner meeting with me. Just out of the blue, he sent me a message like, hey, we need to like sit down and have an advisor meeting. I was like, okay. The dean of students, which I had met with a couple of times. So he's a dean of students for like 800 students. And he sends me an email. He's like, hey, we haven't sat down and chatted for a while. Why don't you email my secretary and schedule a meeting for us? And I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
I talked to my advisor, and he was like, hey, I heard you were leaving. Why? Is it a specific reason? Is it money? He offered, he was like, I can write a letter to the financial department and get you more money.
They really wanted you to stay.
They wanted me to stay.
It's like anything we can do to bribe you, like a check, a lobster dinner.
And then I sat down with the dean of students, and it was the same deal. Hey, I heard you were leaving. What's going on? Is there a specific reason? He was kind of concerned that I was leaving because of persecution. I was being attacked, and so he wanted to make sure like that definitely was not the reason I was leaving.
Was that happened at school a lot?
Well, he's just talking about like with your other professors.
With professors and things, just like similar to those comments that were made by the one professor. The idea that happened both religiously, but it also happened for political reasons as well. Professors that had different political views would not give you as good of a grade on a paper because of things.
It's so like narcissistic.
Instead of reporting it, the students would just
leave.
Transfer.
Yeah.
I'm not transferring. Like, you're going to give me a grade that I earned on this test. Like, you are not going to give me what you want to give me. You're going to give me what I earned.
Yeah.
I love it. Ashley's like, no, we're not taking that. I'm not going to lay down and let you.
And so he was just trying to make sure like none of that was the reasons. One of the things that shocked me the most is I told him where I was going. I was like, I applied to Mid-South Christian College. And he was like, so I noticed you're going to a smaller conservative school.
Yeah.
And I was like, unless you just Googled on your phone without me realizing this, you know the college I'm going to for some reason. If you know anything about Mid-South, Mid-South Christian College, people in Memphis don't even know we exist.
Yeah.
So
for sure. Memphis' best kept secret. That's what I like to say.
And so through all of that, I wrestled with the idea of, okay, all of this new financial stuff is coming in. Like, is that a sign from God that I should stay?
Mm-hmm.
Should I stay here because of this? Should I leave? And I talked with a friend of mine, one of the college pastors, near for one of the churches nearby. And he gave me some really good advice about how God doesn't have one path planned for an individual.
Mm-hmm.
There's not like one right path, and if you ever get off of that path, you've screwed up your life forever. So it's like I had two paths in front of me. I could stay where I was and finish, or I could move to Memphis and go to a Bible college.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and from all the things I was telling him, he was like, well, it seems to me like God will bless you if you stay, and God will bless you if you leave, and there's not really a wrong answer. And I was like, okay, that does not help me.
Yeah.
But I ended up making the decision to just come to Mid-South, to move to Memphis, to study here.
And that's where we met.
And that's where I started meeting these people.
And then we started talking about this idea for church that we wanted to do. And it's funny, I pitched this idea to like all of the students here at Mid-South. And Jacob was like the only one that was like, hey, that sounds great. What do you need? What do you need help with? I'm down to help. And we immediately gave Jacob a million things to do.
That list continues to grow.
It's like, welcome to the workload.
Yeah. So that's great. No, it's always cool to just like get to know a little bit of the backstory of people's lives, see the kind of twists and turns of where you've been, some of the challenges you've had to overcome in your life. I do think it gives us a better perspective of your life and of where you've come from. Maybe helps us understand you a little bit better. And I'm hoping too, for any of you that are listening later on, maybe some of the life lessons that Jacob has learned are things that are helpful for whatever's going on in your life. So I'd encourage you to just tune in. Next week, hopefully we will have Greg Waddell on. He's also got a really, really cool story. If you see Jacob at church next Sunday or at some point in the future, make sure to let him know you appreciated hearing a little bit about his story, and let him know any areas where his story maybe has helped you with your story a little bit as well. The whole idea with our name at this church at Wayfarers, it's kind of twofold, because one, it's based on the name that early Christians used to define themselves, which is they called themselves followers of the way. Jesus Christ as being the way, the truth, and the life. They're followers of Jesus, followers of the way. But I also really think that it's a great way to just think about our own lives as these kind of journeys, lots of pit stops along the way. Jacob had stops on a truck, in homeschooling, in small town Mississippi, eventually at this liberal private school, and now at an even smaller school here in Memphis, Tennessee. So it's cool to know those stories, and look forward to hearing more from Jacob in the future and other people that are on the podcast in the future as well. So we will see you guys then.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Dave Llewellyn at Eastwind used to use when using a microphone, as he says, think of it like an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
And if you can't reach out and lick it, then you're too far away. And then he also used to use the example of think of it like a flashlight, and it's got to shine inside your mouth. Like someone's trying to see inside your mouth, you got to point it that way.
It's like a doctor with the thing.
Yeah. The thing.
Eat the mic. Get the mic closer.
Mics are tasty.
That's going to my personal page.